Just like FaceTiming grandma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Isaac, get your titties out.
What kind of FaceTime do you have with your grandmother? Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the PandemFlick Vodcast. This is the show where your panel of hosts take a deep dive on a number of different films that all center on some sort of viral pandemic or viral outbreak. And of course, this entire show is being recorded during our own global pandemic. So each one of your hosts is locked away in a room, away from society, socially distanced, and we're bringing you entertainment. So welcome to the show. Before we dive in and start talking about today's film, I want to give a brief introduction to your hosts. We'll start with Mr. Adam Harum. Adam, give the folks at home a wave. There you go. That's Adam.
I did it. Yeah.
Adam is an award-winning filmmaker, and he is the host of a web series, Done Better, which you can find on YouTube. Adam, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me again, Boyd.
Next up, we have Mr. Isaac Joslin. Isaac is the man who's drinking from his gigantic chalice once again. Isaac, of course, is another great mind in the world of film, and he has expressed many of his filmic opinions in his podcast, the SacCast Movie Pod, currently on hiatus, but it may return. And I think there's something like 3,274 years worth of material to listen to already up on the interweb. So track down the SacCast and catch up on Isaac's views. Isaac, welcome to the show.
What is dead may never die.
And we've also got Mr. Clancy Bundy. Clancy, are you awake? Oh, there he is. Clancy Bundy is a jack of all trades. Not only is he involved in Done Better and the co-host of the SacCast Movie Pod, Clancy is also a very talented artist and has a lot of his work up on social media. You can find it at Scribbles with Clancy on Instagram. Clancy, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good time.
Of course. And finally, I'm Adam Boyd. I'm a professor of film at Eastern Washington University, and I will be the more or less the moderator of tonight's program. Welcome, everybody. How we doing out there? Everyone still safe, still healthy, still kicking?
Yep, I think so. It's hard to tell if you're infected or not with this thing. So, All right,
that's the extent of how much I care about you guys. Let's get into the program. Okay.
You're nipping it in the bud early because you know we're coming after you on this one.
yeah.
All right, so...
I only see milky white light. That's fine, right?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. There's a theme there.
I started pissing in the hallway because I'm blind.
So, for those of you who might be new to the show, the way that we select these films that we discuss is that every single one of your hosts has curated some of these films and more or less forced the rest of the panel to either watch or review them for these discussions. And tonight's film was a choice by yours truly. And so I will start off the introduction. I'll tell you folks a little bit about the film, give you a plot summary and some background, and then we'll kick it over to our other hosts and allow them to weigh in on what they thought of the film. We'll be hitting basically 2 points in our discussion. One, how the film holds up as a movie in general. And then two, how the film handles the viral pandemic or viral outbreak theme. And finally, our goal is to come down to a vote of whether the film survives the pandemic, meaning it holds up, it's worthy of praise and or recognition, or it is infected. It's a garbage film, and it doesn't make it out of the pandemic. So tonight's film is Blindness, a 2008 film directed by Fernando Meirelles. The director is also known for some of his earlier work, City of God. He's a Brazilian filmmaker, so City of God, the Brazilian film. He's also the director of The Constant Gardener. I think more recently he did the film The Two Popes. This came after The Constant Gardener, this particular film. And I'll give you a quick plot summary and then give you a few fun facts. But essentially, this film takes place in a nondescript metropolitan area where suddenly a pandemic breaks out where people are suddenly losing their vision. They're going more or less instantly blind.
Stricken blind.
They're stricken blind.
You gotta use stricken blind whenever you get that chance, because stricken is such a great word.
Stricken blind.
Yep.
And we sort of follow more or less the story centers around kind of a group of characters, but I would argue there's a single protagonist who is the wife of a vision doctor who ends up being afflicted very early on and losing his vision. And as we follow the doctor's wife, we find that the people who are suffering from this disease are being sort of quarantined in a abandoned asylum. And as time goes on, more and more people are sort of forced into this asylum. What ends up unfolding in terms of the plot is that we sort of have an allegorical play of humanity as things break down, and we kind of get this mini society that forms within this asylum as more and more blind people are forced in, food and resources become scarce, and the outside world seems to be sort of oppressing them. The one catch here that I haven't mentioned yet is that the doctor's wife is the only person who has retained her vision. So she is someone who can see in the world of the blind, and that brings up some points of conflict throughout the film. So just a little bit of background. Fernando Meirelles, this is an adaptation, actually, of a novel that was written by a Portuguese author, José Saramago, and it was originally written in 1995, and there were several individuals who were trying to get the rights to this book all the way from its first release, and then this film came out in 2008. The book is a little bit more loose, I guess. None of the characters within the book actually have names, and so it's a very interesting play on like point of view within the book and how it's expressed. But
did that carry over into the movie? I believe it did.
It more or less does. Yeah. No one ever necessarily says their name.
I was watching it with subtitles on, and everyone was just like, wife.
Yeah,
one-eyed man.
Yeah, it's man with he's the man with the eye patch in the book, and then Julianne Moore plays the doctor's wife, and that is essentially her name in the book.
It's not crying lady.
It's not crying lady. No.
She only cries once in the movie.
No, Julianne Moore is known for crying a lot.
Oh yeah,
it's true. That
it's like kind of Clive Owen's known for not wearing shoes.
That's true. What a neat typecast, right? Yeah. Like, I'm gonna be the no shoes guy. That's gonna be me.
I'm gonna put my sock on this baby's head.
So it's better than Tom Hanks's I'm the guy that pisses in every movie.
Yep.
Oh wow, yeah, he does do that a lot, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's
anyway,
like the second act of Castaway.
So to kind of wrap this up, the cast also stars Julianne Moore as the doctor's wife. The doctor's played by Mark Ruffalo. We also have Alice Braga, who is a well-known Brazilian actress who was also in Meirelles' other film, City of God. Danny Glover.
I was going to say, he directed
makes an appearance. No. Danny Glover makes an appearance. Gael, he has three names. Gael Benicio. Someone help me.
The guy that's in all the fucking Poirot
He's great.
movies?
I love him. Yeah. Anyway.
What's his goddamn name?
It's Gael Garcia Bernal.
Garcia Bernal, yeah.
Yeah. He's in it as well. But just to set up, because I know I'm going to get some static on this one. I saw this film in the theater when it was released in 2008. I was a big Meirelles fan. I loved City of God, and I thought The Constant Gardener was a solid film as well. This film,
shade on The Constant Gardener there.
This film was I liked it. It wasn't his previous.
Is
film,
it actually about a gardener?
It is not.
No.
Okay.
Rip off. Okay, go on.
This film was incredibly divisive when it was released. It opened at Cannes. Film critics either fucking hated the movie or they celebrated it as some new thing, and there did not ever seem to be a middle ground, which I found very interesting. Meirelles at the time had become sort of a darling, particularly in the indie world, particularly because of his past work. And this certainly kind of dipped him a little bit in his work in its release, because it was not celebrated as much as his past work. And
This was his Chasing Amy?
Yeah, except he still has a career.
Kevin Smith has a career. It's just not a good one.
Does he? Yeah. Okay. But so I'll leave it at that. I'll come back. I'll finish this out and give my opinions. But that's kind of the introduction to the film, Blindness, and I'll let you guys talk more about any plot things that I haven't covered. But we'll start with Mr. Harum. Adam, I'm going to kick it over to you. You tell me your thoughts on the film. And start off with how you felt about the movie overall, but then go ahead and dive into how you feel it handled the pandemic aspect.
Well, apparently the book was in pre-production for 15, 18 years because it was said that a film could never be made from it. And they were right. That is true, though. Yeah. The challenge of this is how do you make a movie for the visual medium about blindness? Yeah. So go on. I was not.
It's called At First Sight. It stars Val Kilmer and Marissa Tomei.
There's very few films I like. There's Dune, and then there's It, and there's Blindness. Don Quixote as well.
Go ahead, Adam. You were not a fan. Go ahead.
I was not a fan of this. I would have definitely been one of the critics that would fucking hate it. I think is the way that you put it. I generally seem to have an issue with movies where they're dealing with a lot of heavy themes, and this movie did deal with a lot of heavy themes going on, from like absence of God to what it means to have a disability to like humanity's corruptness of power to like what like a governing body does and leaves you and abandons you kind of thing. But I have an issue with movies where there's a lot of that going on, but then they don't land for me. I almost find it more offensive in a way, and I get more upset if I feel like they're juggling heavy themes and fail, as opposed to not addressing those themes at all. And so when I feel like they don't land and where they're trying to go thematically or making a point in a way, it frustrates me and angers me, and it's very hard for me to see anything outside of like just kind of like you can't handle these things and fuck it up. You have to be careful about this kind of aspect. And that seemed to be a fairly heavy issue that I had with the film, as well as just the overall... I hate to be the squabbly, like nitpicky guy where I have to say, this little story thing kind of bothered me. But the concept of trying to, I see what was going on in the film, and a lot of the ways they're trying to make the blindness obviously a big metaphor to be able to play with themes in humanity, and talking about what happens with class structure in this asylum when suddenly that is gone and you have to reestablish yourself. But I could not help getting hung up on things that made no sense to me. I actually felt the film was worse off for not actually naming the city or country or location they were in, because then I had no grasp on the metaphor of what this government entity was that was forcing them into this asylum. The moment that they were all thrown into the asylum is also the moment where I just started having all of these questions about how the government and how pandemics are actually handled. Like, just this idea of throwing a bunch of people with this seriously deadly disease in a giant room and then backing away and saying, all right, good luck, you fucks. Like, I get it. You have to do that to be able to tell the story you want to tell about class destructuring.
Well, if they did it the way you just laid it out, it would have been great.
Yeah, it would have been great. But they spent so much of the beginning part of the movie, I discussed a little with Clancy about this, but like kind of establishing, you know, the power and the government and what their control and how they handle or how they're going to deal with this situation. But then all of that's forgotten so that they can explore the themes that they present. And I can't do that. Like it was such a disconnect for me that I immediately started disliking the movie and started raising so many questions along the way as to why things were happening the way they were. Like, you don't have this debilitating, terrible disease, as they put it, and have people dying who are the first people to get it, and then just have them bury the bodies. Like, have no scientists actually research or see what's going on. And again, at the same time, they're
die of the disease.
No, I mean, there is a body you can autopsy.
Right.
It's not from the disease, but I'm saying the ability to do that would be a scientific way of handling things. So
yeah, I mean, just to flesh out what you're saying for folks who haven't seen it, you're right. There's like a lot of abstract concepts, and the government is one. It does not give you detail about the function. The government is like this secondary character who you only see bits and glimpses of. So you're right. Yeah, that part it's not clearly defined in the film. No, in the book, it's also somewhat nebulous. There is a sense of a totalitarian government from the start, but there's very little backstory on anything. The movie more or less starts with the blindness happening, and then the book starts in the asylum. So you're right. The film does not have that foundation.
And its ambiguity is an issue for me because of the way in which he is trying to present the ideas of this absence of government, or the government is how it's like handling these people. And I want to know from the director, what is your statement? Who are you looking at? Like, what are you saying here? And I felt like there was an absence of that throughout, as well as like, just in general, I really had an issue with how the blindness was handled. The fact that the moment that, obviously it would be shocking to suddenly wake up and not be able to see and have to adapt to that. But blind people live fairly decent, normal lives, like can do a thing, and live their lives to the full extent that they can. And this movie is using that as a metaphor. The metaphor is like cutting that off and what happens to society. But it's a real thing that people are stricken with. So telling you that the moment you go blind, you're going to be shitting in hallways and you won't be able to dress yourself and you won't be able to like have just common sense bothered me as well, just as a way of representing that disability, on top of like the rules for how they were blind varied on what they needed to do their metaphors and themes. So either they were completely incapable of doing things, with Mark Ruffalo says, I can't even bathe or wash or change my clothes, or they form an entire faction on the Third Ward that is able to control and have guns and like deal thing. I'm like, which is it? And it was so much like, we're gonna...
Which ward had like a fully functioning pre-blind person who's lived a whole life knowing how to be blind?
All right, Clancy, you'll get your chance.
That's an excuse that doesn't work. Like that was their reasoning. They're like, well, we have a blind guy who isn't have this as a disability.
To support what you're saying about the disability, actually, there was a national organization for the blind.
They protested this.
This film because of what you're saying, and then also just the film deals a lot with sort of the moral decay of this society, and their argument was like, just because you go blind doesn't mean you suddenly become
turn
evil.
into World War Z.
But the author, there was actually criticism in the novel about that too. The author said that his response was like, fuck up, like the blindness doesn't cause these people to be assholes. It just gives them an excuse to be who they always have been. So that was his defense to it. But what you're saying was echoed by a very large population. So
and then along with that, like I just had a problem with the way the film eventually structured itself out as well, where like the part where they are in the asylum felt like it was supposed, like I don't know, it felt it very weirdly paced to me across the board, to the point where I simultaneously felt like it was going on too long and rushing through things in weird ways, where the last 30 minutes of the movie were so jarring and jumpy to me that it just lost me further and further and further, where the moment they finally have an uprising and break out of the asylum, suddenly we go from like trading food for sex in this corrupt, fucked up place to suddenly it being a Civil War movie to suddenly it's a zombie movie for 5 minutes and the blind people are like zombies on the like out on the streets too. Now we're having like a real personal like get together and think and reflect on the last couple months in our nice little hotel, and then we're gonna have a shower scene where we all just kind of like are good, and now we're gonna go dance in the rain, and now guess what, everything's fine, and like that all was within the span of this 20 minutes, and for me I was just
Am I the only one here who this week have done all those things within the last 3 days?
I don't know. I think people
danced in the rain.
No, go ahead. Okay. Okay, all right.
I'm told not to talk about it before the trial, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm just spewing out a lot of my
No, that's fine. So
it just was frustrating, and like I said, like the more I see a film, and like obviously a competent director trying to address social issues and problems and these kind of like deeper themes within humanity, when they don't stick for me, oddly, I told Clancy this, I don't know why, I just get angry and like just resented and say, you can't talk about that. You can't like try to draw a parallel between racism and being in an internment camp, but then suddenly that not be what you're actually addressing because you want to spend more time focusing on this. It's like, what were you saying there? What were you saying here? And it frustrates me, and so I couldn't deal with it.
all right. Well,
yeah.
your anger issues aside, how do you? I think we got a good sense of how you felt about the film itself. How about the blindness pandemic? I mean, how does the film handle that? And what were your thoughts on it?
Okay.
I mean, you've spoken a little bit like with the behavior that comes from that and how that was offensive to you.
They did use the excuse that a lot of these movies do, which is fine, where they just say, like, we don't know what causes it, and we have no cure, and we don't know how it gets spread around, and that's basically just a slate to be able to do whatever you want to do. So me getting weirdly, like, why did that person get infected and not this one? And, like, that was besides the point of this movie. It's like setting up, again, the blindness was just a way to get them to the asylum to address these like concepts and ideas. So on a pandemic level, it's what spurs off the story, but it's really not about that. It's about, like you were saying, the crumbling of humanity when suddenly all of the, like a certain aspect of your perspective is torn away. So I didn't feel like, other than it just being a setup, it really didn't matter too much, and like the rules were so loose that I had no concept on who was doing what or why they were infected. And then of course it's solved by just it goes away and they all go, oh, and then the movie ends and you're like and you're like, okay, all right.
I wanted like the Japanese guy to finally realize that Danny Glover was black and get really angry or something.
Well, that was another thing they did. They brought up the racist aspect a couple times and like what that means and putting people on like a certain class levels and stuff. But
sort of just saying that any sort of pressure exacerbates existing conditions. That was kind of how I took it.
Mr. Harum, I think I know the answer, but why don't you give us your final... You're the doctor. It's time to give your diagnosis. Is this thing going to survive?
It's a big old thumbs down. It's a big old thumbs down for me.
It's infected. Throw it
on both
in the
sides.
burn pile.
Yeah, on the pandemic and the other side.
All right. That's a big fat infected from Adam Harum. Adam,
I wish I hadn't gone first because I feel like my anger would have simmered a little bit by hearing other people's opinions.
It's fine. Next, we'll move on to Mr. Joslin, because I love the pain train. So, Isaac,
look at him, sure that I'm not going to shit all over this.
Isaac, go ahead and tell us your thoughts on the film, and then we'll touch on your thoughts on how it handles the pandemic as well. But
yeah, it's interesting to see a director whose films I've liked in a movie populated with actors that I've loved in other movies just be a steaming piece of shit. It was so bad. And really, all social issues aside, and if whether or not it's offensive to blind people, and whether or not it needs like an extended brutal gang rape sequence in the middle of it, it just felt really half-assed. Like visually, it was unpleasant to look at in a way that I don't think was saying anything. The performances felt like kind of half improvised and like kind of Duplassy mumblecore kind of shit. The way the events unfolded didn't really follow a logic that was satisfying either for like a normal movie or like an abstract reflection on whatever the fuck. Yeah, it just was unpleasant.
This is so awesome. You made us watch a movie that was filmed literally 600 feet of dolly track, one light, and shot on a DSLR with a broken f-stop.
It was visually fucking interesting is what it was.
All right, let's not dredge up the abortions of the past. Let's focus on this. Okay.
It's like I almost feel like this story would have been better served with like a Lars von Trier kind of Dogville. Like you go completely abstract, so you're automatically in an alien world. So like the weirdness that we're getting from the movie makes more sense because you're already you know 6 layers of Brechtian alienation devices in, so you can be like, oh, it's like themes and shit. But like with this one, it felt like a kind of, I don't know. It just felt so cheap until the end when they get out of the ward, and then there's like, oh, they paid people to put like newspapers in the street. You know, it suddenly the scope kind of widened and it felt like a real movie again. But like the beginning of this movie, it starts with the Japanese guy going blind in his car. And then the other dude like offers to drive him home. It just felt like an ESL episode of Perfect Strangers or something. It was
fun fact: the guy who steals the Japanese guy's car, he's actually one of the screenwriters of this film.
Oh well, and the fucking weird thing is, like, that's Don McKellar, and I really loved the movie that he made in the '90s called Last Night about the Canadian end of the world.
Yeah.
And I recognized him immediately. I was like, "Oh yeah, that's that guy he has kind of a weird eye, and he directed that movie I really like." Now I'm afraid to go watch that again.
He's actually he orchestrated basically with another screenwriter to get the rights to this novel because apparently a lot of people had been turned down by the original author. But yeah,
well, that's just more fucking salt in the wound. Jesus.
And I'll also tell you that he went through several revisions because he tried to inject what wasn't in the novel, which was backstory and details about all the characters, and tried to give them more defined shapes and names, and then they scrapped it because they were afraid they weren't serving the original vision.
And that's another thing is like the movie, it feels like it was either edited down from a much longer version that made more sense, or a bunch of, well, this was a Harvey Weinstein produced movie, and he is known for meddling and shit. So it feels like there's some really, well, yeah, and that's another layer of awkwardness. This Harvey Weinstein produced movie that features like a 9-minute gang rape, but just like. It was weird what the movie felt like it needed to explain. Like, there's that one point where Danny Glover just shows up and he's like, "Yeah, I think you all need a narrator for a minute." It's me, one-eyed Danny Glover. This is what was happening on the outside. And then he starts, like, talking like he's reading something. It's not, it doesn't come across as someone relating what happened on the outside. It comes across as like the opening narration to The Road Warrior. And it just, there's so many points in the movie that are kind of like that just took me out of it. It's just, and there wasn't even the visual element. I could see what they were trying to do with like, oh, it's overexposed. The blindness is presents itself as just like impenetrable white light or whatever. It's like, okay, yeah, you don't have to keep doing that over and over again. You're giving me a goddamn headache. And everything's kind of washed out and milky anyway.
It's like you've gone blind.
Oh yeah, it's like, oh my god, maybe they planned that.
Like,
maybe that was established in the opening credits with the red light, green light.
if you're gonna like make a movie, it should be
but
interesting. Not pleasant to look at, interesting to look at.
what you're saying, Isaac, was echoed by many critics in that the concept of exploring blindness in the visual medium is a fun experiment, but when you really just start fucking with what you can and can't see, it's not a pleasant experience. So what you're saying is not unheard of.
Again, interesting. It's not fun when it's with visuals, but when it's with audio, Isaac's all about it.
all right.
And also like just the way the characters act. Like, the movie wasn't abstract enough for the characters to act so ridiculously in the movie. Like, I'm all about, as we'll see from one of my my last choice of this series, I'm all about, society collapsing and people reverting back to their animal state. But in this case, there were so many points where it's like, okay, like, they trade the women for food from the Ward 3 or whatever the fuck but then like after that unpleasantness, because Julianne Moore can still see, she just kind of sneaks in there and murders the leader. It's like, what? Occam's razor, why didn't you just do that? You can see.
Yeah, well, it took one of their comrades dying to spur that level of violence from her.
Yeah, I mean that's been a criticism as well, and it's reflected in the novel, and it was a criticism of the original story as well. Is that arguably our protagonist, the doctor's wife who can see, is very slow to react and to realize the power of her sight. So, isn't that the same criticism you'd throw at any slasher movie? Like, why didn't she call the cops? Like, it's sort of like, because then there's
they're at Camp Crystal Lake and the phones aren't up.
Damn it, Clancy! You're just screaming at the screen saying, "Why don't you do something?" Which is exactly the kind of catharsis you get from the many other films. When it comes back around to me, I will at least. I don't know if I'm going to defend any of these comments, but I'll at least give you Meirelles' comments, because everything you're bringing up, he has had the criticism from other people. So he at least has a response. Whether you think it's bullshit or not, that's up to you. But
at any rate, I'm going to tweet him and ask him directly. God damn it.
He's busy making the 3 popes now, I think.
Who are constantly gardening.
All right,
in the city of God. Okay. Yeah. At any rate, it just, like, the things I latch onto most in movies are interesting characters, kind of above all else. Then a visual style that I find interesting, and then you can, do your plot or whatever the fuck. But like, as long as there's an interesting character that I'm fascinated by, that's all I really need. I mean, I love Mike Leigh movies, and that's basically what his movies are. Like, if you're obsessed with plot, a Mike Leigh movie isn't going to do anything for you. But in this movie, it didn't tick any of those boxes in like an aggressively unpleasant way. It's got just kissy-faced Mark Ruffalo sauntering around. He's like, "That's my secret. I'm an ineffectual puss."
You know what? I have a theory that he's like the Hollywood cuckster. Because everything he's in, he's always getting cucked. Even when he's the Hulk, he's always the self-conscious half of a better person.
When they eventually release the spin-off Hulk movie, it'll just be called Cuck. Or Planet Cuck.
The one thing I will say is I can see how the last third of this movie, after they get out of the asylum, could trick some people into thinking they saw something profound and good. Because, like, suddenly the movie, like, you go through all this unpleasantness, and suddenly the movie has this kind of hopeful denouement that kind of ticks all of the magical realism boxes. And I can see people who would normally not be about a movie dealing with the themes of the first 2/3 of the movie being like, oh, that was actually really good. I liked when they took their clothes off in the rain and how they were like a family at the end. And it like, I won't say halfway, like 3/4, not 3/4, that's more.
A quarter?
One quarter of the way kind of worked on me for a minute. And then at the end, when everyone got their sight back, I was like, okay, fuck this. No.
Well, hold on. One person gets their sight back.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but it's implied that everyone's getting. And if you think for a second that they're
now you're gonna read into things.
The first person who was blinded got their sight back. You assume it's going to be a
You're
waterfall
right, and
effect.
there was clearly, a set up structure which you mentioned on how people are infected and get.
Yeah.
No wait. You said the opposite of that.
The pathology of the virus is really well defined.
I'm just using your logic. There's no rules, and then suddenly you want rules to be in the last 5 minutes.
Well, no, I'm just saying.
I'm not fucking Omega Man for me.
This isn't a rules issue. This isn't a rules issue. This is like a thematic issue.
No, I get you. I feel.
Anyway,
I feel you, dog.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm as we've seen from my my love of Eli Lima Sawachthani. I'm king abstraction, but this movie didn't scratch that itch, and it didn't scratch any other itch. It just left.
You're just itching over there.
Yeah.
I'm just itchy. I got hot spots. No scratching. It just tears the fur off.
Well,
I'm
to
just
put
a mangy fucking dog just getting killed in the street and eaten by blind people.
It's the other way around. The dogs were eating.
Yeah.
the
It was the other way around.
except for that one dog.
That's right. It became an Air Bud
I'm not
movie
talking
for a while.
about the
at
movie.
end,
I'm
too.
talking about the blind people that are going to eat me.
Oh, okay.
They'd have to be blind to want to eat your ass.
Okay,
See the marbling on these hams.
Isaac, briefly give us a little bit more on your thoughts of how it handles the blindness pandemic and your thoughts there.
Honestly, I don't give a shit. It's like
Great, moving on.
like the movie. Everything else about the movie was so.
You see what happens when
me.
you humor this motherfucker? You just get it back.
I actually think he's saying something very similar to what Adam said. So go on.
Everything about the movie is so unappealing to me that I don't care about exploring themes because it just feels so amateurishly handled that it's like I'm not gonna give this the time of day anymore. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like when someone starts, when a stranger starts like talking gibberish to you at the, Waffle House or whatever, you just want to get away from them. You don't care what they're saying. You don't want to know their story.
Isaac, is it safe to say this sucker's infected for you?
You just know that they smell like piss and they won't shut up, and you got shit to do,
Mm-hmm. Infected?
Yeah, fuck it.
Okay. Thank you, Isaac. All right, Mr. Bundy, it's your turn. You had something in your craw there with some of these comments. Give us the rundown on your thoughts on the film, and then we'll dive into how you think it handled the blindness pandemic.
Well, I'm gonna fuck this up real quick. Hold on. Pause. And my thoughts when I go get my food.
Oh, okay. We can pause. I'll just make a cut here.
We should call the director because I think I'm that middle ground. I'm not divided at all. It's definitely like a C plus B minus movie.
We found one, guys. We found
one. Throw him in a camp.
It only took 12 years, but we found one.
Yeah.
Well, shit in the hallway. We found one.
I can't really argue with anything the other gentleman brought up. Like, it was visually kind of unappealing to watch, but I also recognize that as the aesthetic they established from the first few frames of the movie. It's crowded, it's in your face, it's not always focused, it's blurry, it's all these things, which are, the answer's in the title of the movie. The characters were, like, I mean, Mark Ruffalo and his wife were both characters that I felt real, but everyone else were cartoon characters. I think that helped the movie focus on the things it wanted to focus on. So I didn't necessarily hate it. The cartoon bad guys were funny, and cartoon bad guys, like the second the dude said, "Listen, it's fine. Just don't talk to me in that tone. I don't respond well to authority. This is everything you need to know about my character. I'm gonna oppose authority." And the fact, like, when the king of Cell Block 3 shows up, I'm just like, okay, these are obviously just cartoon bad guys, and Danny Glover is gonna be the old magic black man.
He doesn't bring a lot of magic, unfortunately. He's kind of just there. He is a narrator, though.
His voice is magic, boy.
Well, him being the old wise character is a trope. Like the Japanese overbearing husband is a trope. Like all the they lean on tropes.
That one's kind of based on reality.
Anyway, I'm just saying, like, that. I think the simplicity of the characters made it so that they could talk about what they want to talk about instead. So, plus minus for me. I appreciated, like, how the movie kept dropping the bottom off of the stakes. Like, at the beginning, I was like, this is schlocky shit. Up until Mark Ruffalo goes to the prison cell, I was just like, this is some schlock. And then I'm like, oh, wait, is this a Saw movie? Is this, like, Survivor now? And then, oh, wait, no, this is Lord of the Flies. Oh, wait, no, this is a zombie movie. Like, all these things these guys are talking about, it's just the continual growth and the floor falling out and the stakes being risen. And you kind of understanding how this affliction is affecting the whole world, which I thought was interesting. Because I guarantee if they had zeroed in on any of the singular things, I would have been uninterested. I don't care about Julianne Moore's marriage. I don't care about... This was like, for me, watching 700 hours of The Walking Dead compiled into one 2-hour movie. I was like, perfect. It's doing everything. Humans are the real monsters. Oh, the slightest strain turns us back into animals. Oh, wow, authoritarian regimes rising from nothing. Like all of that shit was nice and condensed and done with. And then it was on to the next thing. And then by the end, for them to get their sight back and for them to just be like, oh, wow, wait.
He gets his sight back.
Oh, shut up. One guy. You know that was happy ending music. Don't fucking defend that.
Am I going to interrupt for a second?
No, you can't. The fact that it ends with them.
Hold on. It better be funny. It better be funny.
Like, Clancy talking about this just made me realize one of the things that I didn't like about it, in that it's sort of like the Fisher-Price My First Dystopia playset. Like, you have that arrow on the pinwheel, and you pull the string, and it says, the cow says, prison rape.
Isaac, here's the difference. A movie would make me watch about this same topic would be 4 hours long, and it would be ponderous and annoying and stupid, filled with Japanese characters who don't emote for 3 hours, and then they crack a smile at the end, and then that'll be growth for them. So this movie is much more economical with its premise. And
cool shop experiment, bro. That's all you need. You just need blank expressions and a shot of soup.
And the end with them going, oh wait, this was a condition that passes, is just the perfect shitty ending, because then everyone's gonna get their sight back and realize how awful they were to everyone in the short span of time that they were blind. So, which is prescient, considering people can't get a fucking haircut in this country, and it's causing people to, like, up governor security details. Yeah. So, eat a dick, you two. This movie's fine.
No, it's not, though.
It is. I mean, using blindness as the core driver, I could see being an issue. And I'm not blind, so I'm not going to speak on that issue. But I took them shitting in the hallways and shitting wherever being people who are left people who are left unassisted, people who aren't provided for in a facility that isn't taken care of. Like, there's no maintenance. Like, of course.
Make sure you don't pull a muscle with that stretch, Clancy.
It's not a stretch, dude. Like, you work at an old folks' home. Take away the orderlies for a week, see what happens.
I would argue
This
that
movie was about
Isaac was there a lot of
senile old
times, and I
people.
bet there was shit in the floor.
Yeah, no kidding. You weren't orderly, Isaac. How much shit would be on a floor to old folks home if there weren't people to take care of it?
Again, he was there to take care of it, and I think sometimes he probably stepped over it. And said,
So,
"Fuck
yeah,
this
I
Not my department.
Okay. All right. How did you feel about just how the film handled the pandemic in its own right?
This wasn't so much about the virus and its epidemiology, as opposed to the overreaction or the consolidation of power around it. So I feel like in regards to how the government was handling things in the movie and how people formed their own government. Like, there's literally a baton pass in this movie where they're like, okay, the authoritarian over regime, they don't give a shit about what's going on in this facility. And the guy literally smashes the TV and says, okay, I'm the new king of Ward 3 and I have all your food. The theme of authoritarian regimes continues. It's just traded antagonist duty to a new character. So I don't know. I guess it gets a pass. It's not focused on like disease or viral outbreaks as much as it is about the way people react to strain in groups.
Got it.
There's a lot. I mean, and the reason I give it a half pass, like things I didn't like how half the cast disappeared after they escaped. Like suddenly, like there are a whole ward of people, and then suddenly, like only the 6 people who get the biggest paycheck are still involved in the plot.
Did I miss when they lost the black boy?
There's a shot where they lose someone as they're crossing the street. There's they have one more person in their group, and as they cross the street, that person gets left behind and then wanders off the other way.
Yeah.
I just remember thinking, what happened to that black kid?
Well, here's to speak what Adam was talking about. Like, I didn't really see all these things as like thematic exploration of all these things. It was just sort of like, oh, the second there's strain, this guy is talking about black people, and then as soon as the black people and like they're as soon as that's going on, but then that kid is the first kid to go like, well, just go slut yourself out. You're a hooker anyway. Like, he's this immediate sexist. It's just showing everyone has their own hang-ups that they're going to fall back on when they're under strain. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. I didn't really see it as an exploration beyond. There wasn't, like, a lot of talk about racism in this movie. There's talk about people falling on things like racism when they're stressed.
What would you say is your final assessment, Doctor?
It's a pass.
It survives? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely
Right.
gets a pass.
Okay.
God.
All right, I will. I'll wrap this up because I think
Please.
this might be the first time. I'm in command here.
We get to go to both.
Isaac, look at me. Look at me. I am the captain now. Okay.
He's the king of Ward 3.
I am the king of Ward 3. Here's what
Wait,
I'm
just
gonna
pull
say.
out a gun from nowhere. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, wait, where did Danny Glover get his recorder from? Out of nowhere? They brought it with him. Just...
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with anything that's been said. I think all this criticism came out. I'm not like, I can't argue against that. Here's what I'll say and why I selected this film. I think this film has lots of flaws, but there's something about this film that I do appreciate. And I think it's maybe this isn't the right thing to celebrate, but I appreciate the effort or the core concept behind it. I think there are major execution issues, but there's some things in it that I can appreciate where I can say, well, that was interesting. Did all the spaghetti stick to the wall? Absolutely not. But, hell, you threw that pasta hard, fella.
If anything, it's a thumbs up for polyamory saving a committed relationship.
There we go. And here's what I will say. So Meirelles lost his darling stature, after this film, and maybe that was deservedly so, because I think you're right. If I were to pick my largest issue with this movie, if I was to nail one flaw, I think you guys have all kind of touched on it, but I would say that this film works very, very hard to try and say something and actually says very, very little. I think it is pretentious in what it tries to say, and really what it ends up being is very hollow. And I think that the novel probably did more service to the concept in its abstraction, whereas Harum brought up that, maybe this was a novel that should have never been adapted to film. And it's hard to argue that, in that I think this was a very true adaptation. I know the author even had a chance to screen the film and was very happy with it. But I think overall,
he was on his deathbed.
You miss the soul of the work by trying to put it into the visual medium. And again, to me, it's interesting how it plays with the visual strain or the difficulty of losing your vision. And there's this interesting cycle in the film. It begins with this, obscured whitewash of vision. You're lost in this nothing but white. And as you move into the middle of the film, it goes completely opposite. We're underexposed. We lose everything. We go to darkness, and we're left with only our aural, sensations. And then the film moves back into white as there's sort of this, I would argue there's an element of upliftingness to the denouement, but at the same time, I do believe, I strongly believe what Clancy says, and I think the original novel had more of this. It's not actually a happy ending. It is the fact that there perhaps will be a return to normalcy, but what will the damage be in our wake, essentially? Which I think is very relevant right now. But I think to me, when I watched this movie, particularly for the second time, I like things about it, but overall, I think I had this thing in my head where I'm like, if I were a film student, I would think this was a really awesome movie, and I'd tell everyone about it, and I'd be like, hey, oh man, see, they're using blindness as a metaphor for blindness. Like, and that's, I think, ultimately the film's biggest problem is it's metaphors that aren't really great metaphors. They're just very literal, presentations of symbolism.
Once they started just spiffing about the church, who put the blind masks on the statues, like, who gives a fuck?
You don't need to telegraph that. You've already were pretty heavy-handed with the 9 shots of.
I think that might have just been like latent Brazilian Portuguese Catholicism. They had to do something.
Probably, and it's funny if you go back to City of God, and there's much more subtext in a lot of what you're seeing in Meirelles' work. In this one, I think perhaps there was a juggle of trying to be true to the novel in a way that just should not have, the fidelity should not have existed, because this is an incredibly different medium.
At the end of the day, like, they say blindness is the gift of the ugly. So I don't know how to take that at all. Like, that's kind of like this whole movie in a nutshell.
I mean, there is some. Go ahead.
I'm kind of curious if there was like a language barrier thing.
I do think so. I mean, this was also a joint. It was a Canadian, Brazilian, American joint, basically.
Thanks,
co-production. And they did shoot. So most of the city it's a blend of San Paulo and Toronto. Basically, all the cityscapes, because it is like this unlabeled city in the novel, and so that was what Meirelles was trying to encompass too. But yeah, I think there was a language, or even cultural issue. I think it does some things interesting with the visuals, and I think other times it's almost predictable in how it handles it. Again, it's like, oh, I'm going to, there's a moment. It's only a unique sequence, which I think makes it stick out like a sore thumb, where Mark Ruffalo is left alone and the little boy gets up from the table, and they do a sight gag where suddenly the little boy runs into a table he doesn't see, and it's not there in the image before, but when he strikes it, it suddenly appears, which is a very, interesting visual way to play with that idea of blindness. But it also feels like, oh, well, that's like the most basic shot trick you could do that, like, and it's also the only time they use it.
Same thing with like the first person hand sequence where she's like walking, like trying to find her husband in the crowd.
And then like the age old stage phrase, when you put a gun in the second act.
Yeah. It doesn't get used.
He's really upset that guy had a gun.
To be fair, it's all the ammunition is used in it, but a few people get shot, actually, I think.
Yeah,
that's
fine.
He's really upset that he showed up with a gun, even though all the other characters have arrived with their own suitcases of personal items.
He got pulled off the street, like, randomly, because he went blind.
Well, then he was a guy who had a gun on him. What do you want from the movie, man?
Yeah, I can't remember his character's name in the novel is something like Man with Gun. I can't remember something like that. So I don't know. That was, I don't know. I like Julianne Moore's performance in this. I do think it's like stilted a little bit and kind of oddly wooden.
That's how she is all the time.
Until towards the end. And I will acknowledge the criticism that she is slow to act. And that was a big criticism from a lot of people. But Meirelles' defense was that following the novel and talking with the author is that she is slow to act because she's this reluctant messiah. And at first she has to come to terms of who she is in relationship to her husband as a savior or aide. And then it is who she is in the relationship to the people she's stuck with in the ward, like as the keeper of them. And then finally as sort of the starter of a new civilization as they form their new family unit moving outward. So, and there is a deliberate turn in her character after the woman is killed during the very disturbing and I think what makes that rape scene even more disturbing is the fact that it is robbed of any sort of visuals and we're left to experience it with the oral. It almost makes, it makes it feel dirtier. I don't know. It just,
so for me, it's oddly respectful, but also it makes it worse because you can't see what's happening. You can only imagine the terrible things, but at the same time,
for me, it was just the movie didn't earn it.
I will acknowledge that. I do think
you're gonna pull this now, movie, really?
Overall, if the film had been more deft in how it handled things, that might feel a little more. I guess earned, but I would agree that out of the whole film, it's unsettling in a way that, I don't think we can take a lot from it. I don't think it gives us much.
I think if I had to prescribe a thing to it, like, it's missing the climax of every plot point. Like, the Japanese guy and his wife, they have, the problem with him commanding her and telling her what to do, and then she goes against his will, and then all of a sudden there's a resolution at the end.
Right.
And you don't really see what happens there.
Right.
The only storyline or plot line that really has the climax or like the resolution built in is between Mark Ruffalo and his wife.
Right.
Like the government being this antagonistic entity, and then suddenly like they're just no longer there. You miss that. Like it'd be like if it's Star Wars, you're like, okay, we need to go kick the shit out of the Empire, and then the next thing you see is like them partying with Ewoks. You're like, it's missing that like little crux that's gonna like. This is where that happened.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's why this film is interesting. Why after I saw it in the theater, my feeling was, well, I don't think I really like that much. But it's one of those movies where I kept thinking about it and like rolling it over in my brain. And I was like, well, it must have affected me in some way. So I guess, isn't that cinema? This came back to me when we were talking about this because I remember it particularly being interesting in how it handles, and I'll wrap this up, how it handles the pandemic, in that a lot of pandemic films tend to immediately widen the scope or focus on the scope of how the pandemic will spread and how more and more people will be infected, and the urge is to keep it contained, to end it, to find the cure. And this one does a really interesting thing where it just sort of takes the pandemic and plops it into a little tiny allegorical prison, and we view it from a very small scope at first. And I remember that being kind of intriguing. But so for me, this survived, but it's got scabs and wounds, and people should probably not go near it.
It lost its mind. It survived. Like it didn't kill it, but it lost its mind.
Put it out in the shed in the back and throw it.
At what cost?
Barricade it in a bunch of cinder blocks.
So I think it's safe to say that with two shaky survivals and then two very much infected, that overall this film earns the infected status here on PandemFlick. So
you're gonna slide it with like how intense or fervent the vote was.
I think I got to. Isn't that
two shaky yeses is still two shaky yeses.
I just want to point out right now, we could have been talking about 28 Days Later.
It's basically the same
we didn't.
movie.
We could have been full of
How
joy
dare
in
you,
life
Clancy.
It's
and
basically
talking
the same
about
movie.
28 Days Later.
Hey, Isaac, life isn't always about joy, okay?
Yeah.
How would you know what joy was if you didn't watch Blindness? All right.
It can't all be noise musicians ponderously walking around the countryside.
Yeah, you know.
Oh, man, if we could. Oh, man.
All right, well, that was a lengthy discussion of Fernando Meirelles' Blindness, the 2008 film. For those of you watching at home, if you haven't seen the film, if you're a brave soul, check it out. See if you think you agree with a portion of the panel, or
Isaac's
if
been
you
all
agree with the
performative
other portion.
Just
Do you have any
noticed
other
we've been-
Shakespearean pandering for us?
No, it's just we've been at this for an hour on this one fucking movie. Let's wrap it up. Wrap it up.
Wait, is this Isaac Joslin's? Is this? I didn't notice your name
We are
in front of
talking
the
about
title of
something
the
he likes, so it has
the
to
title
end.
of the show. Oh, gee whiz, buddy.
See,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This whole global pandemic is making you a little uncomfortable.
It's about me, Boyd. It's all about me.
All right, everybody. Tell us what you think about Isaac's shitty attitude in the comments, and make sure you click like and subscribe to follow along with other
I'm sure if Charlton
episodes that are
Heston
coming
showed
out.
up and took his shirt off, he'd be fine with it.
All right, I guess we got to tease the next film. The next film is it Children of Men? I believe
I
it.
believe so.
It is. It is.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Our
Children of
next
Men.
film is Children of Men. So, catch us on the next episode and see how we feel about that one. It'll be a more positive, I can guarantee it. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching this episode of the PandemFlick Vodcast. I want to extend my thanks to our hosts, Adam Harum, Isaac Joslin, and Clancy Bundy. Thanks for digging in on this one, guys. Guess I owe you some beer.
Kombucha
All
is
right,
fine.
Boyd.
all right, gang.
Boyd, it's not your fault.
Yeah, it's
not your fault.
It is, actually. But... All right, gang. Be sure to tune in on the next one. Until then, stay healthy, stay safe, and stay alert. Fuck you, Isaac. I beat you. And cut.
Oh, God damn it.